What are the most important takeaways for all 16 NFC teams coming out of the 2022 NFL season for fantasy football? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we do rapid reactions on Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Check it out. There we have a new mock draft there for the 2023 season for April in reality. And we also have picks against the spread that you can check out that I have up for the wild card round of a super set of 6 games. We'll break those games down in full here over the next 3 days. We'll look at the quarterback and the running backs and how they stack up in the rankings for this playoff slate, and then look at the wide receivers, tight ends, and streaming defenses. Close the show and the week later with a look at DFS for FanDuel, DraftKings, and of course our PrizePicks picks of the week. That's all coming up here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Today we will focus on the key takeaways from all 16 NFC teams in the NFL and break those down for you and just our reactions to the season that was here all the way through week 18. Speaking of PrizePicks, today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. All right, what we'll do here, like we did with the AFC, if you missed those takeaways, we did that for Monday's show. Today we will focus on the NFC. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals, go in alphabetical order by city name all the way through the Washington Commanders over 3 segments. So in-depth, looking at what happened this season, the good, bad, disappointing, surprising, all that good stuff as we usually do after a particular week. Now we're doing it for the whole course of the season. We'll have more in-depth coverage of all these teams multiple times throughout the offseason here for you with the free agency and draft season coming up, and then we'll preview all those teams as we get closer to the 2023 regular season. All right, let's see what happened in 2022. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals here. James Conner, we knew there was going to be some touchdown regression, and there was, and he battled through some injuries. But we also knew that he was going to have the backfield to himself in a key role if he could stay healthy. He missed some time, but it ended up as the RB10 on the board. So still a solid RB1 in 12-team leagues here in half-point PPR. So Connor just took advantage of his role, played pretty well. They had to lean on him quite a bit in the second half with the injuries that happened to Kyler Murray and the quarterback carousel. They had not a lot in the receiving core early with DeAndre Hopkins missing time with the suspension. So really a lot of James Conner at different points of the season. They need to rely upon him. Cardinals offense was a bit of a free fall issue down the stretch, but Conner still stood out here with the good production for most of the season when healthy here. So RB10 for him. We knew he wasn't going to score as much, but again, to do that on a team that was really disappointing overall offensively is pretty good for Conner. We'll see if he can maintain that key role out of Keontae Ingram, Corey Clement, and others going into next season with a new head coach. So we'll see how it plays out for James Conner if they make some changes in that backfield. Now, Kyler Murray's not going anywhere. He's coming off that major knee injury, cut short his season. He ended up as QB7 in terms of average fantasy points per game before he went down. So still about the range where you looked at him. We knew Lamar Jackson was a little bit better. They ended up pretty close. Kyler Murray just didn't stand out as much as he usually does. He ended up in a lot of games with multiple touchdowns, but not a lot of volume in the rushing attack, limited volume in the passing game. So he got it done, but it was not the scoring you expected. It was QB7 in relation to scoring being down at quarterback. So keep that in mind. So Kyler Murray still has a lot of questions to answer going forward here. There's availability and durability. That was not a question until this year, but really had to get him late in the season, much like it has done the previous 2 years. So Kyler Murray needs to prove that he can get through a full season without kind of that November, December wall he hits with his durability, and then really drops down his production here was not even available because he went down for the season. So we'll watch what Murray's role does with the new coach, no more Cliff Kingsbury. So some adaptation needs to go on with the Cardinals offense. So that's something we're definitely going to pay attention to closely with the again, Kingsbury was hired in conjunction with them being able to draft Murray #1 overall. So, new coach is going to have to adjust to maybe some of the philosophies they have offensively and tailor them more to this offense to get more out of this offense in 2023. All right, from Arizona, we go all the way to the other side. These teams played each other in Week 17. The Atlanta Falcons. The takeaway here is the Cordell Patterson was still pretty good, but I don't know if they're going to bring him back in a lesser role, complimentary role. But how about Tyler Algier, the rookie running back? He ends up with 1,000 yards rushing in the end with a nice performance against the Bucs in Week 18. 1,035 yards rushing, 139 receiving yards, which is a little bit of a bonus there. 4 touchdowns. So Patterson did cut into that quite a bit early in the season. They didn't give Algier the key role here with Damian Williams being in the mix, but could see a definite expanded role. I don't know if they'll keep Patterson. He's getting older. I don't know if he wants to come back. The rebuilding team that's still trying to find its footing here, the Falcons. So Tyler Algier, again, surprised me. I knew he was a pretty good power back, but he had a little bit of juice, had some explosiveness there. He is kind of the back that Arthur Smith wants in the middle of his offense, and he was getting featured. He was getting those big volume 20-plus touches there down the stretch. So Algier is in a good spot. The Falcons not making coaching change, so they're going to trust what they have in him. He just needs a little bit of help with the offensive line, playing a little bit better. They weren't actually very good in run blocking, so that was great, but improve the pass protection. Desmond Ridder getting a little bit more playmakers in the pass game. So Drake London expanding his role. Kyle Pitts returning healthy to be impactful. Another field stretching receiver they can put there that can open up the running game as well. So good season. Not great for Tyler Algier, but he's definitely usable as a flex, as an RB3 pretty solidly down the stretch. All right, we stay in the NFC South and go to the Carolina Panthers. DJ Moore was a rough early part of the season. He ends up as wide receiver 22 when you look at the season-long numbers in half-point PPR. He's actually per game 33. So he was a wide receiver 2 there in just overall scoring. Wide receiver 3 buried a little bit when you take it per game. A lot of that was the Baker Mayfield connection wasn't there. Then PJ Walker heated up a little bit, but then he really finished strong with Sam Darnold at quarterback there. So DJ Moore is definitely on the way up. Hopefully they'll get a quarterback change for the positive, and we're not talking to go to Matt Corral. Mayfield obviously gone now. Sam Darnold, the PJ Walker. They need to break free from this quarterback cycle. So we'll see if the Panthers land a rookie quarterback. Pocket passer such as Will Levis of Kentucky would seem to be in the wheelhouse of their pick versus C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. But DJ Moore is a special talent. He's a hard worker. He's locked in there with the contract. He just needs a little bit better quarterback play, and he can finish in the back half of wide receiver 1, borderline wide receiver 1, 2. We go to Chicago. The big takeaway is Justin Fields finishing as a strong QB1, QB6, and he missed the last game, and there's a little bit of action before against the Jets. 1,143 yards rushing, 25 TDs, doesn't break 3,000 yards passing. So that was a pretty big production here without the benefit of 3,000 yards passing. A lot of rushing scores as well to balance out that rushing production. So Justin Fields may see his running reined in a little bit, but we also expect his passing to bump up with better weapons to help Chase Claypool and Darnell Mooney. Hopefully he'll come back healthy, and Cole Kmet there. So I think they need 1 or 2 receivers. I know they have Byron Pringle. They like Velus Jones a little bit, but really need to upgrade this receiving core again. Kmet and really Mooney are the guys that I want to keep. Claypool could have a big role as a big slot if he can stay healthy. So a lot of things to look at, but this passing game just needs to improve so Fields can bump up even more in fantasy and not be as reliant on those legs exploding week in and week out for those numbers. All right, the final team we'll hit in the segment, the Dallas Cowboys. They're 2 standout players during the regular season. CeeDee Lamb finishes wide receiver 6, so he lived up to the hype for sure. He really had some inconsistency early. He talked a lot about the Giants game where he had the big drop, but then really got on a roll second half of the season as their clear number one receiver. Separated really with Michael Gallup not being fully healthy and James Washington on the shelf for a while. You didn't see much of Jalen Tolbert, and then really Noah Brown was a flash here and there. So CeeDee Lamb dominated the targets. We saw Dalton Schultz come into his own in his regular tight end role as he kind of probably exits here as a free agent in 2023. But CeeDee Lamb dominated wide receiver 6. Big year for CeeDee Lamb, established as a wide receiver 1 going forward in this offense for a while. Now, how about Tony Pollard? He finishes as RB7 in half-point PPR. He totals 1,378 yards from scrimmage at 12 TDs. So don't worry in the fantasy circle about, okay, when is he going to get the job over Ezekiel Elliott? The numbers are what matters here, not exactly what his role was in relation to Ezekiel Elliott, who also exceeded expectations with his usage and a touchdown streak there consistently for the Cowboys until week 18. But Tony Pollard already had the critical role with the receiving, and that's the thing that people look at here. Too much into the rushing. You want to see the complete back, and Pollard was that complete back with the production. Ezekiel Elliott, they could move on from him with the contract out. That'll help Pollard's role there to see a little bit more work and be that 60%, 70% back that we're looking for. But don't worry about who's exactly starting because Tony Pollard has already arrived here as a RB1 in fantasy and in reality for the Cowboys. All right, there's a look at 5 teams and their key takeaways from the 2022 NFL season from a fantasy football perspective. We'll get into 6 more teams and close the show with our final 5 teams from the Eagles, 49ers, Seahawks, Buccaneers to the Commanders in our final segment here. We told you at the top that this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by PrizePicks.com. That's our daily fantasy sponsor here. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. You can make entries on PrizePicks in a minute or less. And with PrizePicks, you're not competing with other people. You have just player projections available, and you're just looking to go more or less than those projections set by PrizePicks in a given week. So, for example, you look at the first playoff game, if you like Christian McCaffrey to go more than his rushing total against the Seahawks in that weak run defense, you go there. George Kittle to potentially get in the end zone again and keep up his hot streak or push the yardage up against that Seahawks defense, then you can go more as well. And we will give you the PrizePicks pick of the week on Friday, as we always do here on Locked On Fantasy Football during the regular season and now into the playoffs. Really, it's an easy format, easy way to play to get into DFS. Very simple. They're not too complicated. You just pick 2 6 players and they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection. You can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. It's no competing against other people, just you versus projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. So it's not just the NFL, but NBA and NHL in full swing now. College football just ended, but college basketball is still going strong here. So a lot of ways to get in on PrizePicks. Entries, as I mentioned, can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You can expect safe and fast withdrawals from PrizePicks, which is currently operational in more than 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKDOWN. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKDOWN and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your taxes to someone else and show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, it's time to continue the show here in Locked On Fantasy Football in a moment. First, I got to tell you, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversation on the biggest NFL stories Right now, it's Super Wildcard Weekend. Plus, in-depth analysis of the biggest games this weekend with NFL key predictions every Friday, Monday. Local insiders cover what happened during the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let us pick up where we left off. We're at the Detroit Lions, and we know they had a big year. They're like the Jaguars of the NFC. They didn't make the playoffs, partly because they played in the NFC North. They did have a better record in the end by a game than the Buccaneers, but the Buccaneers go on as the NFC South champions. Good progression here under the offense coordinator, Ben Johnson. Their offensive line was intact here. They made good things for Jared Goff. He finishes as QB10. A lot of his best damage done at home, we know, in Ford Field. On the road, he wasn't as good, but Jared Goff overall finishes as the QB10 on the board, so starting QB in fantasy football in 12-team leagues here in 2022. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a big reason why Jared Goff produced a lot. He finishes as wide receiver 9.5 point PPR on the board. So St. Brown, we were not sure what his role would be. We were worried about TJ Hawkinson and Jameson Williams and DJ Chark. Now, DJ Chark was a factor, but it took a while before Williams had the knee healed up to be productive. And then, of course, they traded TJ Hawkinson to the Vikings. So Amon-Ra St. Brown was in position to dominate targets in the slot. It's much like the connection that Jared Goff once had with Cooper Kupp. They're locked in together, a USC receiver that can get open, toughness, quickness, all the good stuff. So it doesn't matter where you line up. If you can produce like a number one, you're number one in fantasy. And Amon-Ra St. Brown definitely did that at wide receiver 9. How about Jamal Williams? Half-point PPR. This is half-point PPR where he's not a pass catcher. Finishes RB8. It was insane. Why did he do that? We know why. He had 1,076 yards rushing. It's a very good total. 18 touchdowns for Jamal Williams. He was just a touchdown machine there. He was making like Barry Sanders near the goal line this season. So a lot of goal line opportunities. Williams was the guy there over DeAndre Swift. In a lot of cases, Swift was more used in the passing game to try to get in the end zone. So we all flocked to DeAndre Swift, and he had a pretty good year when he got healthy and missed a few games. There was decent down the stretch with his usage. But Jamal Williams, from wire to wire, he was very touchdown dependent, but he came through scoring touchdowns in a lot of games this season, including in week 18. So the former Packer really being a big part of what they do. But again, those numbers say it's not catching passes. Yardage is limited here. That touchdown duplication is going to be very hard because there's a very specific role there for him. But Goff and St. Brown can keep it up. I think they're committed to them being the centerpiece of the passing game in Detroit for at least one more season. Wasn't the same situation for the Packers, who lost the Lions at home at Lambeau Field, got swept by the Lions this season, finished below 500 and not make the playoffs. Aaron Rodgers, bad year for him. He fell to QB 26 in terms of average points per game. He was QB 13 on the season for total points, but really when you look at it, he was QB 26. That puts him out of the QB 2s even. Just did not produce. The numbers weren't there, had too many interceptions. Low yardage total, low touchdown total, low yards per attempt, lowest passer rating ever here for Aaron Rodgers. So all those things did not add up to the production. Really struggled to put up the numbers without Devontae Adams. Didn't expand with the passing game to Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon all that much. You also had some concerns as they were sorting out the receivers between Alan Lazard and Romeo Doubs, and also the dynamic rookie Christian Watson, getting all those guys healthy on the same page, inconsistent usage of Robert Tonyan and Randall Cobb here. So overall, just a bad season for Aaron Rodgers. Really disappointing in fantasy football there with that drop-off. And that's the biggest thing we take away from Green Bay. It wasn't much better in Los Angeles. Actually, it was worse. Matthew Stafford, in terms of average points per game before he went down and was shut down for the season with the concussions and the injuries, 33rd. So he dropped all the way down. He was a 40 touchdown pass guy last year and was an elite fantasy football quarterback, even with the league tying in interceptions last year. So Stafford completely drops off. A lot of his Cooper Kupp went down there. He was rolling. Kupp was producing, and he was locked into Cooper Kupp a little too much. Didn't get Tyler Higbee involved at tight end enough. You also didn't have a number 2 because Odell Beckham Jr. tore up his knee and they didn't bring him back. Al Robinson was a much hyped and ballyhooed pickup here to help as a number 2. He didn't deliver. They didn't really have a number 3 consistently beyond Ben Sporadic and trying to figure out Van Jefferson. So it was rough here for this offense. So that is the disappointment here, the whole Rams passing game, especially with Kupp not being available for a lot of games. One bright spot at the end of the year was Cam Akers. He was just a disastrous pick early this season for everyone. He wasn't getting the touches. Then he had to take a little bit of leave of absence. They were trusting Darrell Henderson for a while. Then Henderson kind of faded. You had Malcolm Brown fade. So it was then Cam Akers' situation again. 903 yards there from scrimmage, 7 touchdowns for Akers. So maybe he's redeemed himself. Maybe to set himself up to be a feature back next year. We wish he would catch a few more passes, but that's something that we want with Akers for sure as a complete back going forward. We'll see if Sean McVay and his coaching staff stays intact here. They might hire within to keep that McVay offense alive here and maybe potentially help Akers next season. For the Vikings, it was Justin Jefferson. We thought he had a shot at being the number 1 overall pick, competing with Cooper Kupp, competing with Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey. What a big year for JJ. 128-yard receptions, I should say. 1,809 yards for the season. So we thought he was going to get to 2,000, but 2 clunker games there at the end against the Packers and Bears curbed that, but 9 touchdowns, so scoring a little bit more. We wish the touchdown number was a little bit higher. I think this guy has the potential for 12 to 15 if Kirk Cousins can find him a little bit better in the red zone. Adam Thielen cuts into that total quite a bit. KJ Osborne. Then we know TJ Hawkinson had a few touchdowns as well, but a touchdown upside is there. The high floor and high ceiling exists for Justin Jefferson. It's a big year for Justin Jefferson. He's just scratching the surface. What a special receiver here in the first 3 seasons. And again, it can only get better for him in this dynamic offense led by Kevin O'Connell. We thought he could be getting the Cup treatment, and he did here with the domination targets from a former Rams offensive assistant. We go to New Orleans, and Alvin Kamara, what a disappointment there. Michael Thomas, I don't even want to talk about. I mean, Chris Olave, breakout season, the changing of the guard happened there at wide receivers. Thomas couldn't stay healthy, and then Jarvis Landry didn't end the season healthy. We'll see if Rashid Shaheed can carve out a role behind Olave going forward there. But really, Alvin Kamara is a disappointment. We drafted him in a lot of leagues as a borderline RB1 in many situations, but he didn't have the same pass-catching role. Really struggled again the second year without Drew Brees. Really did not benefit from the Andy Dalton, Taysom Hill type of mashup here without James Winston. So the checkdowns were not as prevalent. The touchdowns definitely were not. So RB 18 for Alvin Kamara. So I think this is probably a sign of a fade. I don't think he's going to be seen as a guy that's going to bounce back real big from that spot, given his age and wear and tear in this offense. The last team we'll get into in this segment, the New York Giants, another surprise here in blue. So the teams of blue definitely came through. You had the Giants do it, Big Blue. You had Honolulu Blue in Detroit. Then we had the Seahawks also do it here with our surprising teams. The Seahawks and Giants made the playoffs on the surprising Lions, just out of the playoffs. Daniel Jones at QB9 finishes with 3,205 passing yards, but the biggest thing is 22 combined touchdowns, along with 708 rushing yards. So that was really the calling card for Daniel Jones. So a nice breakout season for him in fantasy. In reality, could have a little bit more upside if they can clean up that receiving core. End up with limited receivers. Richie James and Hodgins were his top receivers. Remember, he started with the likes of Kadarius Toney, Sterling Shepard, Kenny Galladay. They're going to have to clean house a little bit at wide receiver. So the targets and guys that are going to help him in the passing game will only go up. But you figure Daniel Bellinger will see a bigger role next year. They'll shore up wide receiver, give him some opportunity. The running will be there. So I think they'll keep him. They didn't have his 5th-year option picked up, so they'll settle on a decent deal. They have Daniel Jones back in the offense to see what he can do in year 2 under Brian Dable and Mike Kafka. And how about Saquon Barkley? The fact he was able to stay healthy for most of the season. 1,650 yards from scrimmage, 10 touchdowns. He finishes as the RB6 on the board. So big year for Saquon Barkley, just staying healthy. So that was pretty nice to see. We weren't sure. So the moral of the story with Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, all these guys that were hurt. I mean, everyone can get hurt. We saw it with John Taylor. No one is a sure thing durability-wise in the NFL, even if they've had the injury history or not. So that's what we learned here from Saquon and Christian McCaffrey. If the guy's healthy and looking good early part of the season, just we'll focus on that and don't worry about their past because things can change pretty quickly in this league with the effectiveness of a particular player. All right, we do need to get to takeaways for 5 more teams. We'll get that in the final segment. We'll go from the Eagles to the Commanders there for you here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We told you about DFS earlier. Now it's time to tell you about our betting partner, That's BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season that just ended to basketball, we know it's a hot time for NBA and college hoops, and we also have, of course, NHL in action here, and more soccer on the way after the World Cup. They've got it all available to you for action at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We know you do from listening to the Locked On Network. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information for sports. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football with the key takeaways from 5 more NFC teams from the 2022 regular season. Here, we're to the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, what a year for him. We know he had this potential. He was a solid QB1 in terms of a 12-team league last year, but now he's a QB1 overall in terms of average points per game. He missed some time down the stretch. Patrick Mahomes was the top scorer overall, but when it comes to the points per game, Hurts edged out Mahomes. 3,701 passing yards, 760 rushing yards, 35 combined touchdowns. This guy is a reliable machine. It was really hard not to have him for those key games in the fantasy football playoffs, week 16 and 17 against the Cowboys and the Saints. So that hurt a little bit, but overall, you can't complain. He was a fantasy football MVP caliber player. He may be in contention to be the NFL MVP with Mahomes, but big year for Hurts. You really got a great return on investment if you took him as a middle QB1. He finishes QB1 overall here again. Hopefully you were able to navigate if you had Hurts on your team carrying you the whole way. Could have seen some teams struggling without him if they didn't have the right plug-and-play players. But definitely a big season for Hurts and a guy to invest in again next year pretty highly. You'll have to pay a little bit more to get him, so maybe you'll look for a little bit better value versus paying for Hurts. We'll look for the next Hurts who can rise above his status to really smash it in the season. We go to the 49ers. Big year for Christian McCaffrey. We told you about Barkley staying healthy. How about McCaffrey playing all 17 games? First with the Panthers and doing it with the 49ers. We knew the 49ers move was going to be pretty good. We didn't know how good. He just clicked immediately in the Kyle Shanahan system. What a big year for him. 1,139 yards rushing. That's fine. But 85 receptions, 741 yards receiving. So you put that together, he's really pushing big time towards 1,900 yards from scrimmage. So big year for McCaffrey, one of his biggest seasons. And again, the durability, fantastic. And the transition to San Francisco really kept him healthy as they really used Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell well to give breathers at the ideal time. So 13 scores, big yards from scrimmage, big year for McCaffrey, and now the ideal offense and back in the conversation with Austin Eckler to be the number 1 overall pick in fantasy next year because of his receiving forward role in San Francisco. And how about Brandon Ayuk from the receiving corps? Deebo Samuel missed time late in the season. He was downgraded a little bit because he was not the same rusher. They didn't need him as much with Elijah Mitchell and then Jordan Mason. Then they had Jeff Wilson Jr. early before they traded for McCaffrey. So they didn't need him in the rushing attack. He also missed time. But Brandon Ayuk produced with the quarterbacks here pretty consistently. First with Jimmy Garoppolo, then with Brock Purdy. Wide receiver 15, so just out of the wide receiver ones in 12-team leagues in half point PPR, ends up with 1,015 yards receiving, his first 1,000-yard season in the NFL, 8 touchdowns as well. So very good usage in scoring position from Brandon Ayuk. So CMC was the expected guy, and the biggest surprise there, playing all the games, transitioning from Carolina to San Francisco. But look at Brandon Ayuk. We liked him as a sleeper, and he really shattered it. He wasn't just a wide receiver 3, almost finished as a wide receiver 1. Great breakout return on investment on Ayuk this season from the 49ers. There's no investment made in Geno Smith. There, everyone was off him totally. He was not being drafted, not being considered. The Seahawks were left for being a very ineffective offense. But then there was DK Metcalf, and you had Noah Fant adding to Tyler Lockett. So the weapons started to look pretty good. Then Geno came out in that game against Russell Wilson in week 1. The Seahawks won it, and that set the tone really for both seasons. The Seahawks surging into the playoffs here late. The Broncos just being a disaster with Russell Wilson and not coming through. But Geno, also in the process, is finishing as a QB5, scoring 18.5 points per game. That is fantastic. And Russell Wilson faded hard into QB2, QB3 territory. Geno Smith sets the mark for most passing yards in a season by a Seahawks quarterback. So that is pretty special. He used his weapons really well, Metcalf and Lockett, and the tight ends working with one Shane Waldron, who seemed to click well. Geno played within the system. He also could lead on a good running game. They also improved their offensive line with the rookies at tackle Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. So a lot of things lined up really well for this offense, but the weapons were there all around, inside and outside. Running game was there to play off and play action. Geno also did some running for that production as well. So gotta love Geno Smith saving his career, getting new life on it, and really outproducing Russell Wilson easily here, starting in week one and continuing that. And how about Kenneth Walker? He finishes as RB15. This is despite not really having a feature role until a few games in the season when Rashad Penny went down. So Kenneth Walker is going to get a lot of first and early second round overall consideration there in fantasy football in 2023. Deservedly slow. So he finishes on a 100-yard game streak on the ground. We wish he would get a few more touchdowns, get a few more catches. Those should come next year as he probably gets into a feature role as a second-round pick going into year two. So love Kenneth Walker, Geno Smith. They were the lifeblood of this offense. You could use a little bit of better red zone prowess for the Seahawks, and maybe you'll see that here in 2023 as they're more effective overall and continue to improve their team. We go from Seattle all the way across country to Tampa Bay, and the Buccaneers, they were better than you think in fantasy football. Tom Brady, wearing number 12, finishes as QB 12, so that's how kind of we ranked him. So he kind of lived up to where his value was in fantasy football. So if you were drafting him earlier than that, you know that that was not going to happen based on the situation here, losing Rob Gronkowski, not a full season of Antonio Brown, some injuries there with Chris Godwin getting healthy slowly, Cade Otton being a rookie, Cameron Brate transitioning, was he going to help as much as Gronk? So there were a lot of signs to say regress and kind of fade Tom Brady here, but he finishes at kind of where we thought he would at QB 12. And Mike Evans, despite that long 11-game touchdown drought, wide receiver 16 for Mike Evans at half-point PPR. That's pretty darn good. I know we drafted him as a wide receiver 1 in the 8 to 10 range there with Tyreek Hill. So if you took him over Tyreek Hill, you were disappointed. But overall, when you look at it, maybe Mike Evans also salvaged his numbers there. I don't know what would have been the number without that explosion in week 17 against the Panthers when he had more than 200 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. So that probably saved him a little bit. You want a little bit more consistency. But overall, Mike Evans is not as big of a drop-off, 10 spots maybe, but still finished pretty respectable. How about Chris Godwin? Going for more than 100 receptions for the first time. He finishes wide receiver 20. That's pretty good, given his status was a bit iffy coming off the knee injury early in the season. Ends up to be pretty reliable in half-point and full-point PPR leagues with his reception total. So in half-point, he finishes wide receiver 20 overall this season. So a pretty solid wide receiver 2, and I think that exceeded expectations, while Mike Evans definitely was a little bit disappointing in relation to drafting him, but Tom Brady definitely was not. And we close with the Commanders, despite all their quarterback recycling and cycling through with Carson Wentz and Taylor Heineke, and then eventually Sam Howell. Terry McLaurin got the job done. He produced with all the quarterbacks, finished with wide receiver 14. So big finish for him. Was used a little bit more effective in the red zone, coming off the big contract extension. So McLaurin looked every bit as a number 1 in reality in fantasy, so just outside of the wide receiver 1s and half-point PPR in 12-team leagues. So good to see that. And Curtis Samuel was pretty good. He finished as a wide receiver 3 in the top 36 overall. But the guy I'm watching next year is Jahan Dotson. He finished as wide receiver 38 despite missing some time, real time, the hamstring injury, 523 yards and 7 touchdowns. He scored quite a bit. I really like Dotson being that number 2, emerging as that number 2 producer as well. We'll see what they do at quarterback between Wentz. I don't think Wentz is going to be back. Heineke, will they go forward with him? Will they just roll with Sam Howell? But however I look at it, Howell being a rookie, Dotson being a rookie, going into year 2, they should have pretty good chemistry here. So that's what I'm taking away. I mean, really, with Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson Jr., I think we saw what clearly happened in that backfield, and they both ended up the season hurt, so there could be some changes there. But McLaurin and Dotson, I think, going forward as the 1-2 that we're going to look at for the Commanders there to produce that way, and maybe have both guys finish in the top 24 at wide receiver be wide receiver 2s going forward. So there you have it. There's a breakdown of the most important takeaways from all the NFC teams here from the 2022 NFL season from a fantasy football perspective. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first of the day. For a second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. That's also where you'll find Locked On Fantasy Football. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer with your NFC takeaways from the 22 season. We'll be back tomorrow looking at the quarterback and running back rankings here for the wild card round of the playoffs.